need to figure out what is going on with Final Fantasy. What used to be one of the most prestigious video game series of all time has now become a laughingstock to the point where I would say that Square Enix is just the Eastern Ubisoft. Welcome back to Words of Paradise. I'm your host, Leon Idle, and yes, if you hadn't heard, articles like this have been popping up, honestly, multiple places throughout the last several months, always saying the same thing, that Final Fantasy games aren't making their money back. They are falling below expectations. Here we have a tweet from Hazard Game and Dragon Dojima. According to Square Enix financial results, Final Fantasy 16 and Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth didn't meet expectations. We released multiple new titles, including major titles such as Final Fantasy 16 and Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth, but profits unfortunately did not meet our expectations. Now, this does not technically mean the games failed. They may have just had, Square Enix may have just had much higher expectations for the games than they got. That being said, I think that's people being too generous. They absolutely were failures. By every metric, even if they made money, they were failures on every other metric, and it is a damn shame to see because, again, we're talking about games that Final Fantasy VII is heralded alongside things like Metal Gear Solid and Shadow of the Colossus as one of the greatest games of all time, a perfect game, and then 20 years later, 25 years later, we get the remake of people's dreams, or at least what people thought they dreamed of, and it's kind of a joke. In fact, it's a 3-part joke because it's an episodic release, but it gets even better. So we're going to go ahead and go through a couple things here, because my boy Mugen Lord says, no shit. Locked the games to one console, wait a year later to release on PC, Final Fantasy VII Remake divided the audience, Final Fantasy 16 divided the audience, and he's correct about all these. But there's also so many more factors. Like, these 4 things alone wouldn't necessarily tank the games or tank Square Enix, but there's 4 things in addition to a myriad of others. And I feel like we kind of got to talk about this, and that Square Enix needs to realize something, because think back to Saturday Night Hypnosis last week. We ended the stream romanticizing and remembering fondly, reminiscing over Final Fantasy. Like, the stream just sort of devolved at the end to arguing over Final Fantasy 7, 8, 9, 10, Tactics, 6. We were just running the gamut. And that's not the first time that's happened on SNH. We've actually had that conversation multiple times because for whatever reason we have morons on the panel who don't realize that 9 is the best Final Fantasy. Actually, Tactics is the best, but that's neither here nor there. The point is, let's address what Mugen Lord says. So point numero uno, lock the games to one console. Okay, you can make the argument, well, they're not locked to one console, they come to PC later, which he says in point number 2, but look, people think of Square Enix, and by proxy, Final Fantasy, as a Sony property. It's not. It's not owned by Sony. It's not developed by Sony. But yeah, they've had those exclusivity rights for pretty much as long, for a long range of time. It was originally a Nintendo-only product, switched to Sony. There was that weird period of time in like the late 2010s where it was being put out on both consoles, and then reverted back to being Sony exclusive. Yeah, in a time, an era where exclusivity means nothing, this is, of course, going to be a major backslide. This is going to be a downfall for Square Enix. People really aren't buying consoles for exclusives anymore. I mean, yes, you've got your fanboys that are doing so, but the vast majority of folk are not buying consoles for exclusives, mainly because, let's be real, you can play everything on PC. And for the few things that you can't play on PC, they do eventually come to PC, like his second point here. If you had released Final Fantasy VII or Final Fantasy on the Xbox as well, you would have at least seen a little bit better profits, and maybe not by much, and maybe it would have cost more to, develop and print that version of the game. I don't know if it would have actually offset anything, but you would have sold more copies because you're not targeting just one little niche audience. Then yes, wait a year to release to PC. This goes back to point number 1. Yeah, I get why you're waiting the year. There's probably contractual obligations with Sony because, hey, we're going to put these games on your platform. It's going to stay exclusive for a year. Then we're going to go to PC. Okay, that's great and all, but if Sony's not paying you enough to, sort of compensate for the fact that you're not meeting expectations, you would have just been better not making some ridiculous exclusivity deal, even if it's just a timed exclusive, because by the time the game comes out a year later, I mean, people have already played it, or people have heard the public discourse, and maybe the game's not that good, like in the case of what a lot of folks say about Final Fantasy 16, or frankly, even the Final Fantasy 7 remake and rebirth games. There's also the competition of new modern games. Why buy a $70 Final Fantasy re-release? Oh, sure, it's new on PC right now, but Black Myth Wukong just came out. What do we need an older Final Fantasy game for when Black Myth Wukong just came out? Or it doesn't have to be Black Myth Wukong. Insert whatever game here. Final Fantasy 7 Remake divided the audience. Again, bingo, bango, bongo. Not only did it divide the audience, but they didn't have to divide the audience. This was a PlayStation 1 game. This is in an era where we are getting remakes of PlayStation 1 games all the damn time. Resident Evil 2 and 3 remake, for example. Resident Evil 3 remake being the worst remake of all time. I mean, it is worse than the original PS1 game. How do you remake a video game for PS4 and make it shorter than the original PS1 game? That's neither here nor there. The point is, Final Fantasy 7 did the same thing. Rather than just say, hey, this game that is considered, that is heralded as one of the most brilliant games of all time, the game that revitalized and saved not only the franchise, but Square Enix as a company. This game that is loved by generations. Yeah, let's do a remake in name only, but completely change the battle system, change the characters, change the story. It was an insanely baffling decision, and then let's also break it up over the course of 3 episodic different games. So you charge someone $60 to $70 thrice. That is, look, I get it. I'm a capitalist. Capitalism's awesome, but that ain't the way to do it, homie, because you are every installment. The first remake was already divisive. Second remake burned the most ardent of Final Fantasy VII fans because of such insane changes to the canon. Does anyone even care about your third game? Especially considering how many years are in between these development cycles and how many years we've been waiting to begin with. What? We're going to get Final Fantasy VII Remake on PS4, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth on PS5, then Final Fantasy VII Reimagined on PlayStation 6. People ain't even going to buy the PlayStation 6 after what's going down with the PlayStation Pro. That is... Then Final Fantasy 16 divided the audience. Now, to be fair, I'm not going to say too terribly much about 16. I haven't played 16. I actually, to kind of counter one of my earlier points, had been waiting on the PC port. I get a lot of people say that it's, not RPG enough, that it's not traditional enough, that it's basically a cutscene simulator. Look, fair enough. I get it. I'm also a filthy Final Fantasy 15 fan, so, yeah, I'm not going to say too much on that. But the point is, there's also far more additional issues, such as, Square Enix, again, being the Ubisoft of the East, and that they bow down and kowtow to, ESG and DEI. They make frivolous changes for the West. They do not believe in their Eastern property in a way that they treat their properties and their programs differently in the West than they do the East. The games are failing in both, frankly, so I don't even know if that aspect matters too terribly much, but that is that is one common complaint you hear from fans in the West, fans that, let's be real, are the ones that are helping keeping you afloat, because this game is not like this is a Japanese-only game. This is one of the biggest franchises in the world, so yeah, you should probably, placate the base of actual fans, not individuals you hear online. But Square Enix also does insane things like, outsources studios to the West that aren't making profits, that aren't making money, and in doing so, they're going to use Final Fantasy to try and recoup the cost of their failures in the West. But then, what about budgets? These games are insanely expensive. I mean, just look up what the reported budgets were for Final Fantasy 16 and the Final Fantasy Remake, Birth, whatever games. They are insane when they didn't need to be that high. At least Final Fantasy 7 didn't need to be that high. Give us a game with pretty graphics that was worked on by some of your most talented developers and make it look modern. Like, that's it. You did not need to dump all this time, money, and resources into things that most folk honestly don't care about, aren't going to notice, only serve to bloat your game, and then in an industry that's already dying, make your overall product so expensive to produce that you need to hit near record sales numbers every time that you're not going to hit because you're not listening to the fan base. I mean, this is all cyclical. It's a circle. It's all around. How can you make a game with these level of budgets, divide your fan base on them, then expect them to be successful? Again, we are talking about Final Fantasy here. We are talking about one of the most prestigious titles in video game history. If you just walk up to someone on the street and it's like, yo, name 5 video game franchises, they're gonna say, Mario, Sonic, Zelda, Final Fantasy will easily be the top 4 or 5. They might throw Halo up there with it as well. I mean, I get it. Maybe they'll say Last of Us, modern gamers, and whatnot. But if we're just going to take a sample size of just the general populace, Final Fantasy has been around for so long. It's got so many generational fans. It's going to be in that top 5 list. If not, it is absolutely top 10. So to see a top 5, top 10 franchise of all time list game like this become just the laughing stock of JRPGs and kind of a laughing stock in modern gaming. Like, look, they've always had their hits and misses. Final Fantasy 13 was a joke. In fact, Final Fantasy 13, 13-2, and 13 Lightning Returns were all jokes. Final Fantasy 15 was a disgusting, buggy mess with next to no content on launch. Now, Final Fantasy 15 had that Cyberpunk 2077 or No Man's Sky effect where, it was fixed later, turned out to be a really good game. Final Fantasy XIV absolutely killing it, only after the failure, though, of the original Final Fantasy XIV, which is only after the failure of Final Fantasy XI, both attempted failure, both failures of doing the MMORPG model. So yes, Final Fantasy has always been hit or miss, but we are in such dire straits when a remake of 7 and the next mainline entry in the franchise are both failing to meet sales expectations when these should be the flagship games that make so much goddamn bundles of cash they're used to fund other smaller games like the Final Fantasy IX remake that's been rumored for ages now. And let's say that is in the works. Do we really want it? Look at what they did to Final Fantasy VII. Look at what they did to Final Fantasy XVI. Look at what they did with 13 and the original iteration of 14 and the way 15 launched. I mean, do we trust a Final Fantasy IX remake? Oh, how the mighty have fallen. I don't even know that I have a point to this, so much so as just to vent my frustrations, because I see these articles, and I very rarely cover them when it comes to the Square Enix stuff, because you can only, there's only so many ways you can skin a cat, only so many ways you can slice a pig, and for whatever reason, I was scrolling through, I saw it, and it just hit me. It sort of just rocked me in an annoying sort of way, and probably because Mugen Lord is not only correct, but only scratches the surface when there's also so much more on top. And by the way, Mugen Lord, great dude, great channel, check him out. I'm sure if he was to do a video on this, it would be so much more well-researched and well-laid out than mine. This is just a venting session because Final Fantasy, gaming in general deserves better, but Final Fantasy absolutely deserves better, and Square Enix can't get their head out of their ass to make good decisions to actually listen to their fan base and player base, and I'm just getting so damn tired of it. Well, those are just my opinions. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below. Or let me know on X where you can find me at Bolt the Word. And please just subscribe. I'm a nerdy news channel. I cover nerdy news every day. Very rarely just venting sessions about video games, but usually anime, movies, music, Magic the Gathering, you name it. Check me out on Instagram at wordsofparadise_Leon and become a member for $4.99 a month. You can join the Discord, choose the articles I'm going over on a day-to-day basis, choose the videos I react to on my Friday night live streams, and of course get involved with over 90 other vital idols. We are a bright, beautiful, glowing, vibrant community that I cannot wait to grow even further because we do care about diversity, but only one kind of diversity of thought. If that's interesting to you, join the Discord, hit subscribe, and until next time, it is all here in the nerdosphere. This has been Words of Paradise.